you know, he said, you know, good afternoon, ladies, as people do, and carried on. And we would notice then how cold it was. And he was just lovely. You know, we wanted to take a photograph of him. He was just lovely. But, but it was only later that I began to think how weird it was, because his bicycle was a sit-up and beg bicycle. It wasn't a contemporary, and there was not an ounce of lycra at all. And the whole, you know, he just looked like he came from a different time. So he didn't have a helmet. I mean, that's conclusive, isn't it?
Well, he's obviously from Barry then, isn't he? That's well, you know, that explains it all then, doesn't it? That's a really interesting story. And do you know what we're going to do? We're going to have you when we do the Monk Nash one, right? When we do the Monk Nash one, I would like you to repeat that story.
Shall I elaborate?
No, there's nothing wrong with elaboration. Go for what you want to elaborate now or then?
Oh, then, you know, when I'm called to do so. Yeah, and Barbara will dress up like him.
I've just got to go and get something, and I'll be back. Hang on.
Well, we've got big effects, those big ghostly effects.
Barbara's going to wear +4s, is she? I'm looking forward to seeing this.
We've been working on it all week.
Okay, folks. We are going to get started now. Some of us have to feed the goats, so let's get on with it. So right, let's cut your mics. And I am actually going to keep. Who am I going to keep with me tonight? I'm sick of listening to Goff. So I will keep Karen with me.
I'm honoured.
And Amy will stay with me with their mics. Everyone else is off. So 3, 2, 1, mute all. And then allow. No, we're not going to allow participants to unmute themselves. Right, there we go. Right, so what we got to do? We got to get Karen up. Right, Karen, can you hear me?
Yep.
Amy, you old witch, can you hear me?
I hear you.
No, I meant that the other way around. Sorry. Right, so what we need to do, I need to share the screen when I've got the images up, which for some strange reason, I've got to open something a minute. I'm not going to tell you about the experience I had at the MySteg WI with the wrong images they saw on my screen. Oh, you want to hear about that, don't you? Oh, I've got to share. I've got to share. Right. So first things first. What are you seeing on the screen, Karen?
Picture of a church and a village.
Can you see anything else on the screen?
Yeah, you're down the side with everybody else.
But nothing else. Oh, that's okay.
Oh.
So if John makes little sort of weird things, then that's fine. So obviously, Karen, at any point, and Amy, if there's anything, right, Karen can tell me if she can't hear me. Amy is allowed to speak. I've got to tell you just a little bit of a thing. I went to give a talk in MySteg once, and I've been researching. I've been researching a joke. Right, the joke was woman with big jugs. Right, nothing wrong with that. Okay, so as I was researching, I had all these dodgy images on the screen. Right, so eventually I had a woman holding 2 jugs. Right, it was fine. So when I started the lecture, everyone started coming into the hall, and I was facing them, unknowing that my projector was showing all those dodgy images behind me. I was never invited back. And strangely enough, a report of the lecture didn't make it into the local newspaper either. What brought it to my attention before I turned around was the look of absolute horror as the vicar wandered in.
Oh no.
So right, so here we go. So this is Ewenny Priory, and some rather important things are needed to be said before we go any further. The Ewenny landscape has a number of ghosts associated with it, but it's unlikely that we're going to cover them all, because I've got to try and paint a little bit of history, a little bit of archaeology, a little bit of myth, a little bit of legend, and a little bit of art, and a little bit of my own stories from doing ghost walks across this landscape. So apologize in advance that I don't cover the monk wandering the church graveyard that's over here. But what we will say is paint the scene. When you actually go to Ewenny, if anyone's familiar with it, you'll follow the brown signs, the Cadw brown signs, and they will lead you down a very strange lane. And the very strange lane will eventually take you out to see this wall on the right, and a tower which isn't shown on this aerial view, and this gatehouse. You'll park your car along here, you'll see the gatehouse, you'll see this tower, you'll wander around the church graveyard, pop back into your car, and then you'll drive away. Many people don't know what this is over here in the far left-hand corner. Nobody ever sees this gateway. And Amy, just briefly describe this gateway over here.
It's pretty much the same as the front one, straight by it. When we visited it, it had quite a serene feeling. It's got an upstairs as well that you can actually go to.
You did go into the upstairs, did you?
No, it was our guests that did.
Oh right, yeah. We'll leave them to it. Anything else you want to see or say?
Regarding experiences there, or just...
not my experience. That's
my experience.
Your experience, yeah.
My experience there, I always feel really, really ill. Like my legs always shaking and nauseous, and it's just generally a really unpleasant feeling I get when I'm there.
Okay, well that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Thanks for that. So, history and archaeology of this area. So if we want to start from now and ignore the 1800s, go to 1795. We've got a certain Mr. Turner visiting this site, a certain artist, a certain painter. So he visits here, and we've got two paintings of this landscape, which is rather interesting. If we want to go back to, say, the Roman period, it's believed that this might actually be the site of a Roman fort. And when people visit this site to me, I always point out about this wall, that this wall is built in a very strange way. The other thing that this landscape paints us is a landscape of a very strange nature. When we say a very strange nature, if you compare this with Ogmore Castle that we visited a few weeks ago, you'll see that this gateway is far more impressive than anything on display at Ogmore Castle. This site, like Ogmore Castle, was constructed by the de Londres family, or the de London family, whose burials are to be found inside this church, underneath the transepts here, underneath this tower, and you can see some effigies there. So they're responsible for funding the building of this tower, this tower, this tower, and some of the walls around. But they're also responsible for building Oystermouth Castle and also Ogmore Castle. And they put so much effort into building this that it was handed over to an abbot and 8 monks. And you're thinking, this is a very interesting military site. It's very well built, just for monks and just for an abbot. And it's said at the dissolution of the monasteries, there was about 1 monk and an abbot here, and that was it, roughly around the 1540s. So the question has it, why such a military site? I'll just briefly say that we know from references, sometime in about the 1280s, Edward I wished an army to gather in South Wales. And all the evidence tells us it gathered here, within these walls. This was not just a monastery. The great disguise for this site was that this site was a military site. It was used for those campaigns against the Welsh. And if this site hadn't been built, maybe the campaign against Llewellyn the Last in 1282 would have ended slightly differently. Anyway, let's move on. Let's try and get us to a little bit of the nitty-gritty. Oh, we're here. Just want to tell you this. This is that over there. And rather interesting, forget the caption there. Rather interesting, this is very strange. And the reason why this is very strange was that when the estate is associated with the Picton Turbervilles, and the family itself in the 1800s decided to change the landscape. This was a little bit after and around the time of the changes associated with Capability Brown and the landscape. And one of the things that can be said is that this strange thing was constructed. If anyone ever goes to Ewenny, yeah, there's a public footpath that goes past the farm all the way up here and back along. You've got this strange thing in a field. And if you tramps across the field, hopefully not trampsing across a load of crops, you will actually see that there's a ditch around it. And there's some unusual trees there and some unusual wildlife. We don't know anything more than that because this was stylized in the 1800s. If it's got early origins, I'm not really sure. The wonderful thing about Ewenny is that so much of the frontage of the castle, you know, that main gateway, is to be found on the internet. But the one that Amy described earlier on, let's go back to it. This one at the back here, there's no photographs of this anywhere on the internet. Strange that, because nobody ever gets to see it. But the images on the internet that show this gateway, and there's a little story about this gateway, rather interesting story. We had a nighttime vigil at this site about 3 years ago. When we went to this site 3 years ago, we went inside that gateway, and I was actually talking to spirit, as we would call it. I was talking into the darkness, and I was saying, you know, if there's anyone out there, you know, tell us something. And I asked a question about an interesting question about, did Edward I ever come here? And guess what we picked up on the sound afterwards? Et tu and you. Basically saying in French, it was clearly in French, et tu on the sound. Clearly me saying, did Edward I ever come here? And the ghost saying, et tu and you. In other words, saying that Edward I had come to the site. It was absolutely amazing, that moment. And we didn't really get to going around to the back of the site until a year later. But again, that's another story. But this isn't another story. J.W. Turner, this is taken from one of his paintings. You can see that it's not clearly a perfectly a Turner, but this is you know, this has been taken off one of his prints for publication. The rather interesting thing is very close by, you've got the River Ewenny, and it's quite high there. And you look at the gateway, and the gateway is the one that I described, that we heard that French voice. And the road actually comes along there now. And of course the River Ewenny is a little bit further away. And when he went there, the whole landscape was rather ruinous. He even entered the church. He even entered this wonderful priory church that you can see in front of us. And when he entered the church, it was being used as a stable. And actually, the other thing as well is there was another section of the transept that was still standing at Turner's time, and it just collapsed after his visit. I don't know if there's any link there. So this is another nice image just to tell you a little story. When I go to this wonderful site, on the way, I tell a little story that Mary Trevilian provides us. There you go. This is the reprint. Folklore and folk stories of Wales. And in lots of times, I'm on site and I'm telling the stories and I'm building them up. And can't really do that tonight because we haven't got a great deal of time. Page 198, she says, between Ewenny and Bridgend, there are places named White Lady's Meadow and White Lady's Lane. Some believe that the lane leading to Ewenny may have once been called White Lady's Lane. Others say, from here, there's the gateway, it was north of here, and that space that's north of here, that lane, White Lady's Lane, if it was there, the space in the middle known as White Lady's Meadow. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you what Mary Trevilian tells us, and then I'm going to tell you the extra addition onto the story. Remember, Mary Trevilian is telling these stories in the late 1800s, usually from sources that go back to the 1600s and so on. In former times, the White Lady was said to appear and point towards Ewenny. People said she knew where treasure was hidden, but could never go to find it. She was sometimes seen wringing her hands as if in great trouble. A man once ventured to address her, and she seemed very pleased. He asked what he could do to help her, and she answered that if he would hold her hands tightly, both her hands, until she told him to stop, her troubles would leave her. The man did as he was bidden, but the loud barking of a dog caused him to look round and release her hands. Was this a ghostly dog or a real dog? With a scream, she cried, "I shall be bound for another 7 years," and vanished. A later story attributes the White Lady to a crime that had been committed in a demolished house in the meadow. That's interesting, that, you know, the demolished house in the meadow. Strange place to have a house. And apparently, she had been murdered. And that gives the origin of the story. She said she'd been murdered by some gentleman who left the area, some kind of tradesman. And for her soul to rest, she needed to be released from her torment. There's a very similar story to Ogmore Castle, actually, and a very similar story to Castell Coch, and another one at Taff's Wells. Lots of these stories have a warning attached to them. And I think on this note, always be wary of women that ask you to hold their hands. On looking at this, you can get an idea from Turner's time, the landscape had changed a great deal. And look at this. This is one of Turner's work from another locality. And you can tell the majestic forms he's painting what he sees inside the church. And the one he actually painted of Ewenny showed cattle in there. And he actually showed that it was just really neglected and and really missing where it had been many generations before, at the heart of a monastic landscape. This is that gateway. Now you go into that gateway, and the amazing thing that can be said about that gateway is as you enter it, you look up and there's what's called murder holes. This had 2 portcullises. So there were more defences, as I say, within this gatehouse than the whole of Ewenny, than the whole of Ogmore Castle shows you. At Ogmore Castle, there's a few ditches. There's no gateway, and there's just a keep and some of the walls. So this is more defensive than the whole structure. So it tells you that this was probably the home of the Delandres family, and Ogmore Castle was built for another reason. I remember telling you that other reason was probably because it being the location of a Welsh lord's castle, the Delandres family had to build something there. The machine room is above this, 2 machine rooms. And if you manage to get into this area, past the iron portcullis, they'd pour hot oil down onto you. And there was other doors as well. If you managed to survive that, you had another portcullis to go through. The answer is, you wouldn't have got any further. These individual buildings were meant to be individual defensive bastions against anyone attacking the site. Why would monks really need a structure like this? At this site, I've been there many times at night. And I've been there many times at night because the walks usually end really late. And we do haunted walks and everyone goes off, and I usually left at these places by myself to look around, make sure there's no equipment and so on. And in lots of ways, it's got a very misty atmosphere. It's got a very strange atmosphere. I don't feel scared of being there. But then again, something happened to me at the other gatehouse not so long ago. And it's wise I tell you the story in full. But we'll wait a while. We've mentioned the Romans and the Roman evidence, and we've mentioned the sense of the medieval landscape. But there's another tower that tells you a little bit more. But before I head away from this gatehouse, there where the cursor is, you look over and you see the other gatehouse. You see it. Wonderful sight. And it's a lot better state of preservation than this one. But again, this is something that nobody ever really takes notice of. This is a Georgian stable house. It's a really nice Georgian stable house. It's almost intact other than the original doors. But this is, you've got the gatehouse, which would be over on the right, the one we've just seen. The house is stepped back from this. And the tower that we'll look at is a bit further over on the left. And it's said amongst this estate that ghostly monks still wander the estate. Usually you see this when you examine a very changed landscape. And usually you see the sense of hauntings within the landscape when things have changed a great deal, like they have done at Dunraven, like they have done at Ogmore, for example, and in other places. And what could be said is that this site, like many other places in the height of the medieval period, that date, which you're all familiar with by now, 1349, it's likely that every monk in 1349 within this estate would have ended up dying, and they would have had to brought new monks into it to look after the estate. It's a very important landscape. Strangely enough, very strangely enough, when you look 50 years later and you look at the story associated with Owain Glyndŵr, for example, there's no mention of Ewenny. And it's very strange, that. Very strange indeed, because it would have been a nice fortification for those damnable rebels under the command of Owain Glyndŵr. We're now into the church graveyard. This is the church graveyard all the way over towards the left of the gateway. And that transept there actually collapsed at the time of Turner, because it was such a neglected church. And in here you've got the beautiful spaniels, the beautiful vaulting of the Norman work inside. And you know, there's lots of money has gone into this site. But you know what? It's so good to be given these opportunities and calmly tell these stories. Sometimes when I take people to Ewenny, I always miss out this following little fact. It's a little gem. I used to run a shop in Ewenny many years ago. And I used to take my children for a walk, and my wife, we used to walk all the way here. And somebody came in the shop one day and they said, have you heard about those bodies that have been dug up in the church graveyard at the Priory? And I thought, is this some kind of joke? What, bodies dug up in the church graveyard? And I'm thinking, is this person having a joke with me? And he said, actually, bodies that were excavated in the church graveyard that have been dated back to the Roman period. That's interesting. And that's interesting to do with something I mentioned earlier on. I mentioned that this was believed to have been the site of a Roman fort. And those bodies dating back to the Roman period, a little bit of evidence to say that there may have been some kind of Roman military presence nearly 2,000 years ago at this site. And this was all part of the research of a local boy from Bridgend, a guy by the name of Doug Jones, who wrote 2 books for his search for Bovium or Bomium. There's a missing Roman site that's mentioned on the Antonine itinerary, which was a list of sites that the Romans occupied in around AD 200. And Bovium was mentioned. Most archaeologists like myself believe that that was actually at Cowbridge. But when you add all the information together, it's almost as if Bovium could actually be here as well. So possibly, maybe a Roman site at this locality. It's a quite strange church graveyard. When we had a ghost walk here, that tree over here, that yew tree, people were sensing things. What can you remember they said, Amy, over by this tree?
Over the tree? Well, I could sense an immense, like, you know, like a lot of spirits, and I picked up on the lady Eunice, who was it? They built the place, the priory.
Back in about the 1130 odd, that the church was actually slowly being built by funding from the Delandres family. Yeah.
Yes. That's where I picked up. It felt like a really tranquil feeling, a happy feeling, yes, amongst evil that is in that graveyard. Because I swear I saw a hooded figure in that graveyard, and trying to be skeptical of thinking it was going to, like, the shape of the gravestone's shadows on the wall. Mm. But the way I was pointing my torch, I just turned around back to you and it was gone. Yeah.
That's the usual effect. You know, one reminded me about when we went into the church graveyard, that there's a wall here, yes, and then it was just that sense that there were spirits in the left hand side of the church graveyard, in the sort of towards the chancel area, which is very, very strange.
Yes, that's where I saw the hooded figure as well.
Yeah. So moving on a little bit further. I would like to come back to this because I would like to go to this. So we have missed 2 images, but we'll come back to them. Now that building is the building that, that tower. And very interesting, this tower, because the church is actually over there. That's the house. And the gatehouse with the one that we showed you earlier, in that Georgian gatehouse, or not so much of a gatehouse, you know, that's where all the carts and everything were 200 years ago. And the other gateway that we've mentioned is there on the right. But this is a very interesting tower, because when we undertook to have a haunted evening at the site, the very strange thing about this building is that when we sat in there and stood in there, this one haunted evening, we looked out at the doorway area, and there were strange figures passing. And it wasn't our torches, it was nothing else. Very strange figures. And it's a room that's full of orbs and various strange things. And you know, you could put it down to the landscape and ephemeral sounds and so on. But this building itself, there are strange things that you can hear, whether they're inside or outside. There are strange things within the square building, very odd square building. So again, what we're going to do, we're going to go back. We're going to look at those 2 images. But then after that, we're going to go a little bit further behind this site. And then we're going to look at this tower. So what we're going to do, if we move back, rather strange tower this, a circular tower. Now, the wall here can't really see it, but if you look at this stretch of wall, you'll notice there's an earlier wall below it, leading all the way to the gateway. So that's why some people feel that this is, you know, the site of possibly going back to the Roman period. And this very interesting circular tower. And then, if we want to go further, look at this here. When Turner actually painted this, he actually painted these, when you go in there, because of the weight above, the central boss stones seem to be weighed down. This is all Norman architecture, rather important and impressive Norman architecture. And there is, amazingly enough in here, signs of wall painting, original medieval wall painting within this room. And if you ever get an opportunity to go in there, that, you know, occasionally there's open days, and they do actually have services in there today. Not obviously today, but obviously when things go back to normal. And you look at this and you find the majesty of the Norman architecture. But obviously all the stained glass isn't of Norman origin. All that would have been smashed out in the time of Henry VIII's men, going all the way back to the 1540s. But again, this is an amazing site. Does the site have pre-Norman origins? It's very, very likely that it does. And what I would like to do is I'd like to tell you my own story and where we need to go with that. So if we move a few slides forward, we'll come back to that, and here we go. Amy, remember this?
Oh, do I? Yeah.
Do you know what? We've got to set the scene, right? And I'm sorry if Goff complains at the end that I put a little too much banter into this story and John moans and refuses to pay, but I've got to do this. I've got to do the whole story. We decided at the we decided that on the 22nd of December last year, no, it wasn't. It was 21st of December. It was solstice. That's right. It was solstice. So 21st of December last year. And I had gone to Glastonbury with my partner, Michelle, and my son, Owen. And when we went to Glastonbury, when we got there, I said, oh, by the way, Michelle, I got to work tonight. And she said, you what? I got to work tonight. She said, we come all the way down to Glastonbury. We've got to drive all the way back now for you to do a haunted evening. And I said, yeah. And she said, oh, that's just not fair. We don't have enough time to go around Glastonbury, right? Anyway, you can imagine, I had a bit of a row with Michelle. I had a bit of a row with my son, Owen. And we drove back, and there was a thunderstorm occurred on the way back. We struggled to drive back in the car. We had to pull over. Rosamond was going. Amy was going to be there. We had 3 other people there, and we had a blind person and a attendant going to be there as well, right? So when we're driving back now, I'm phoning everybody on the phone while Michelle's driving, and every single one said they're cancelling. They're not going to do it. And it was, we thought, right, okay. And then on the way back, I had a massive row with Michelle. And she left me just before Christmas. It was absolute hell, right? So anyway, and then obviously everything got back with Michelle Christmas Day, and that was fine and all the rest of it. So we're going to have another walk in January, right? 2 weeks later. So I go to feed my animals, right? And on reversing out from feeding my animals, my car went off the road and went down the bank, right? So I phoned everybody and I said, the walk is cancelled again, right? So a week later, we decided to have this walk. And what did you say to me, Amy?
That I had a feeling of dread.
And that you didn't want to do it, did you?
No, I really didn't.
So I convinced you to go.
Mm-hmm.
And we only had 3 people turning up. Rosamond
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to chance it. I think Rosamond said she was ill or she had a bad feeling or something like that, right? She could tell us at the end. She said she didn't want to go. And then we went ahead with this, right? I was late. And what did you say the atmosphere was that night? And what was my attitude? Amy?
That night. Oh, it's lagging. Hang on.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it, Amy. Yeah. One sec. Hang on. Start again, Amy. If not, go for it.
Sorry.
Right, Amy, because
you're
right, you're lagging a lot. So what I'm going to do, I'll do your bit, right? So, and then we'll come back and see if your mic's okay. Amy said to me that I didn't seem right. The atmosphere was really bad. We turned up, and Amy, can you say something now? No. Okay, it's over to me. So, so I basically, what we did, we went to the other gatehouse, and I tried to talk to Spirit. And from the other gatehouse, I could look down to this one. And when I was looking down to this one, and you know, there was nothing really happening. So we decided to walk all the way around the site, past the circular tower, all the way to the back of the site. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get the other map up. So you would walk all the way down here, all the way to the back, all the way around the wall, all the way into this open field, all the way, and then you get to this gateway. There's no other way of getting there, right? So when we had got there, everything seemed to be fine. Everything was fine. When we got into this area, 3 of the group decided to go into these rooms and have a look around. Amy refused to go in there. And the camera was on. I think it was still filming. And then when everyone started to say, you know, bit of a strange atmosphere. And what did you say the atmosphere was here, Amy? Amy is not there again. So Amy basically said to me, she said, there's a bit of a neutral atmosphere. And I said, there's a bit of a neutral atmosphere here. Doesn't seem to be any negative or positive energy. And then we got into this underneath the gateway again. Everyone said, there's not really much going on. It's a bit boring here, isn't it? And we said, oh, yeah, it is. So, and then something happened. And hopefully I'll be able to articulate this. Something happened. Remember, it's pitch black, everybody. It's completely pitch black. I'm stood there and I say to Amy, hold the gate for me until I get to you. Everyone wandered off. And the next thing, Amy wasn't there. The group wasn't there. And I thought, this is a bit strange. Oh, they must have just gone off, right? So anyway, I got to the gate, which is a bit further here. And I walk into the field. And I don't feel right at all. I just don't feel right. I just feel there's something not quite right. It just doesn't, I don't feel comfortable. Anyway, I go into this large open field. If we want to go back to that image, I go into this hang on, not that field. I go into this field at the back, right? And I can't find my way back around. I just cannot find my way back around. I just get lost in this field. I just cannot find my way back around. I'm completely disorientated and confused. I don't know where I am, right? So I managed to find a way out the field, right? And I've never walked along this route before. It's not there. I went back to find it afterwards. It's just not there. So I walked down this route and my mind started to say, actually, this is 5 years on. I actually thoroughly believe my parents were dead. I thought I'd lost my car. I thought one of my children was dead as well. I actually thought that Michelle, my partner, had given up hope and she had sold all my things and everything, you know. I thought it was 5 years on. Anyway, I was really stressed at this point, and I actually got all the way back around. I found the route back, right? And then my mind started to think, well, I'm not going to be able to get home because my car's not going to be here anymore. I was very confused, very disorientated. I walked all the way back. And I actually got back to, one second, let's take it a bit, hang on. I've missed that image, 1 second. That image isn't there. Hang on. I got back to here, right? I looked into the distance, my car wasn't there. It's pitch black, my car's not there. I can't hear Amy and the 3 other people with us. I go into all-out panic. I'm not sure what's going on. I can't see my car in the distance. It's not there. I close my eyes. I walk a little bit further, and lo and behold, I see the car. I start seeing the 3. I see the other 3 people. I see Amy, and if that happened, and if that's not time travel, I don't know what is. I must have gone 5 years into the computer and into the future, and I have got no idea what happened that day. It's almost as if I had time traveled. And some of you might think I'm absolutely barking. I've completely made this up, but that's exactly what happened. I was completely confused. I had no idea what was going on. And Amy, are you there now? Nope, Amy can't corroborate any of this, which is a shame. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back to those other images. And we're going to go back to this. Now, this is a nice backdrop, actually, for a story that's got nothing to do with Ewenny. But it also helps paint the very strange landscape. when a few years ago, I was delivering leaflets in Wick, and there's two houses opposite the church, and the house over towards the right opposite the church. And there's a guy, he's a builder called Calvin Dark. And I had been told never to knock his door or never to deliver a leaflet through his door. So if you tell me not to do something, I usually do it. So I put a leaflet through the man's door. And after I'd put a leaflet through the man's door, the guy, this Calvin bloke opened the door, and he said, I don't like having leaflets put through the door. But he said, my wife does. And he said, my wife's thoroughly into ghosts. And I'm thinking, all right then. And you know, it was one of those occasions I wish I had my tape recorder going, because this is why I said to Sue, I wanted to record the story she just told us, because the recording wasn't on at that point. So I wanted to retell us at Monknash. So he eventually wrote the story down for me for my book, Ghost of Glamorgan. And if anyone wants a copy of that, ask me at the end. And he told me this story. He said driving back from Bridgend, and he said he passed through Ewenny, and there's a shortcut apparently towards Wick via a lane called Stony Lane. And I said, okay. And I thought, why are you telling me the story? And he said, actually, this story about Stony Lane involves a ghost. And I said, well, all right, tell me. And he said, I'm driving back with my wife. From Bridgend, through Ewenny, and up through sort of Corntown, because you've got Ewenny, then you got the Priory, and then you got sort of south of there, you've got Corntown. It's classed, Stony Lane's classed as Corntown. He said he drove down this lane, and they weren't going too fast. And there was this gentleman, this gentleman, and he was this guy in his about his 70s, with a sack over his shoulder. And he thought, this is strange. There's a gentleman in front of us, you know, crossing the road. Anyway, they stopped the car. This gentleman was in their headlights. And I'm not sure he said he beeped, but he certainly, him and his missus certainly saw this individual. And after the individual had disappeared, his missus looked over towards the left-hand side, and there was no one there. There's nothing wrong with that, is there? Anyway, he got back that evening, and he said to his missus, he said, there's something not quite right about that. And his missus said, what's the problem? I don't know. Anyway, he drove back the following day, and directly where they saw the ghost, walking from the right-hand side of the left-hand side of the road, right, coming from Corntown way, he said on the right-hand side, there's a wall. And on the left-hand side, there's a hedge and a gate, which is all covered in brambles. And then the thing is about this is that the man could not have walked from the one side of the road to the next. He said he drove up and down the road, and then he took his missus with him, and he drove up and down the road. And it was clearly the spot where there was the wall and the brambles on the opposite side. Anyway, weird story is, I think they went to, oh God, I haven't got the book in front of me. I'm doing this from memory. One of the pubs in Wick. They went in one of the pubs in Wick, the one nearest the church, and they were he was telling this story to somebody in the pub, and a guy said, "You know what? What? That's my relative." And he said, "You what? That was my relative." Apparently, he was a guy in the war, right? He was a guy in the war who used to be a bit of a spiv, who used to sort of collect rabbits and stuff and sell them on and all the rest of it. And he said I think he said it was his uncle. His uncle died years earlier, a few years earlier, before Kelvin actually saw him. And he said, from the description, that was actually my uncle, because he used to dress like that. He used to have a sack like that, everything like that in the story. And if that's not a ghost, what is? That was clearly a ghost that was seen that night. So what I'd like to do now, we're very slowly coming towards the end. So I just want to finish the slides that we're looking at. So what we're looking at there is rather interesting illustration from the heart of the 1700s, and you can see a little bit of an exaggerated church there, and it's very strange that everything's out of proportion. That's supposedly the house there, and that's that gateway. I mentioned that I had that feeling it was a time travel event. And that's that other gateway. You know, that one's got a roof on it and everything. It hasn't now. And this is lost all its sort of fixtures and fittings for the roof, but the roof space and everything is there now today, which is great. There would have been a ditch around the whole thing. And as this was being landscaped, you can see these trees as part of the landscaping scheme in the 1700s. But even though you can see the church there, with this bit of an aisle and all these other buildings are all part of the house, that was very much a ruin inside, even though the roof kept on there. Rather interesting, that. And again, moving on a little bit further. Oh, there we go. And again, looking down. So we've been into this gatehouse, we've been into this gate, we've looked at this wall, we've looked at this tower, we've mentioned a little bit about the church graveyard. And there's one word of warning. Don't go to Ewenny at night and visit this site over here, because you get a feeling that the entities along this stretch don't feel right. They feel very negative, and you don't feel welcome when you go there. And again, the black monk that said to wander around this church graveyard, that's told time immemorial. Moving on a little bit more. And just one last thing before we move away from this image. If you ever go there, you park here and you can see this. Don't ever be tempted to walk into the yard. But if you ever do get an opportunity, they occasionally have events on the lawn here. And it's a good opportunity to actually look at the walls and look at the house. It's very grand around the front, but it's not very grand at this building here. Moving on. And that's what it looks like. So in a way, when you actually go there, this is classed as the front of the building and that at the back. But when you go there, the back is almost the front. And this is the back. But nobody ever gets to see this, only if you're very, very lucky. We've seen that. And I think if anyone ever gets the opportunity, there are many images of this site, you know, very sort of many images going back to about the 1750s, sort of in a bit of a ruinous state. Ask me where the archaeological evidence is. This site has never been archaeologically excavated. We mainly base our stuff on the history and the ghosts and other things that go bump in the night. But again, if you ever get the opportunity, it's well worth looking at some of the really nice images on the internet, particularly from the Frith collection. And what we're going to do, when you ever get to go to the church, don't go there on a day that they're actually filming. The reason why you don't go there on a day that they're actually filming is that you don't get to appreciate that when you actually go in there, there are actually some original medieval tiles on the floor and some beautiful effigies associated with the Delandres family. And the reason why I'm not showing you as many photographs inside the church because I've kept some of them for my archaeology and history of Wales evenings lectures. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to open the mics and ask if there are any questions. And Amy, are you there now before I open the mics? That's a shame. So let's bring everyone on. And I don't know where Amy went. Actually, what we're going to do, I want Amy's contribution for a moment. Amy, can I hear you now?
Yes, I've been muted the whole time.
That wasn't me. You must have muted it. Actually, you know what? I would like you to give your full peneth on that night. Give it a minute or so, and just because what I think happened, you went, something happened. So probably there's a reason why. So tell us your take on that. What happened that night?
That night, it was probably one of the weirdest things that's ever happened. We were at that back gate, and Carl was filming with the camera, and he was just talking to the camera and just making just saying stuff. And our three guests went ahead, and I waited for Carl a minute for him to catch up, and he said to me to open the gate or hold the gate, and he then just said, "Oh, I'll catch you up." So I went off with the three guests, and I just looked back at Carl, who was still with the camera. Went around that really, really boggy field, back around, and I went to wait with our guests. And I started getting worried about Carl, because I think he must have been about 20 minutes, because he said he was going to, he was just going to be a minute, and a minute turned into 5 minutes, 5 minutes turned into 10 minutes, and then I really was starting to worry. And then when he finally came back, Carl had told me that all this had happened, that he travelled five years forward in time, and I was like, what? Like, it was one of those things where I don't think I can still believe. I don't think you're balmy, Carl. I find it hard to fathom, if you get me.
Yeah.
That happened, and I was like, you still have the camera and the footage from that night, and I wonder if there'll be some answers there.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
but you weren't yourself at all that night.
And I don't think we've basically said that night that we wouldn't do any haunted evenings unless we could really understand what was going on.
Yeah, because it was originally going to be Merthyr Mawr, but you changed me to go take the guests to Ogmore for an hour, and then to the Priory. But I haven't been to Merthyr Mawr, so I'm yet to experience
Merthyr Mawr is a very strange experience. And Del, you've been on Merthyr Mawr with me, haven't you? I'm unmuting you. I can't unmute. Right, okay. Unmute all. Right, yeah, go for it. You've been to Merthyr Mawr with me, and there's a very strange experience there, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, it's not eerie, but you can feel there's something there.
Yes.
You can feel something different.
Yeah. I agree. What I'd like to ask is, anybody got anything to say tonight?
Yeah.
Goff.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's just to do with his name's Wyndham Dark, the gentleman you met.
He always told me it was Kelvin Dark.
No, it's Wyndham Dark.
So he's used a false.
We lived in Wick for many years, and all the children were brought up in Wick, so we know quite well. But the thing about Wyndham was he was an airline pilot. He was a fighter pilot in the Second World War. He was a war hero, and he wasn't a bullshitter. So your story has got a lot of credence to it if he told you it. But the interesting thing about Wyndham was he always, on November the 11th, at Remembrance Sunday, he was the one that always said the little prayer at the end of the service with his medals on. And on the 60th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. Wyndham was walking, we were all waiting outside the village hall at the memorial, and Wyndham walked from that house, as you know, it's right opposite there. Across the road, he dropped dead, had a heart attack.
It's irony, eh?
Yeah.
Exactly.
On the 60th anniversary. Dropped dead. In the middle of the road.
Christ.
Strange.
Very strange. Very strange. Very.
It's a spooky place, work anyway, isn't it?
Yeah. I tell you what, whenever I've delivered leaflets around there, right, it's the last place I want to be delivering leaflets. Oh, I got to tell you, there was one story once. We delivered a leaflet to this guy's house one day, right? And he chased me and the other person down the road with a broomstick or something. It was very strange. It was those houses opposite the green, you know, the weird ones.
Yeah.
Strange people. Anyone? What about the Sue and the Barbara?
That's where we lived, opposite the green.
It obviously not the same house, because if it was your dad.
Can I ask, Carl, what was in the leaflets that people chased you away?
Vote for me in the next election. No, it was. You will get an opportunity to do that in the assembly election, actually, because I'm the main list candidate for a certain party. But the fact of the matter is, we were delivering leaflets on the ghost walks.
Oh.
So that was what was in the leaflets. Anyone else want to say anything else?
Yes, what did you mean by machine room when you was building underneath one of the
everybody,
towers?
Right, Pam. Shh. Right. Basically, what usually happens is a gatehouse. The machine room is usually a cog and a cranking mechanism to bring the postern gate up and down, right? And there would have been two. They would have needed two separate mechanisms, not one, two. And you would have needed two separate people to operate them. So that's what the engine room is. In Hollywood, it's usually metal cogs and all the rest of it. But these would have been wooden.
Thank you.
Anything else, folks?
Yeah. Last week, Carl, you promised you were going to tell us about the KARL-JAMES ghost.
Oh yeah.
I have been doing some research about the KARL-JAMES, some more research. I have actually contacted the owners of the KARL-JAMES to give me some more information about the ghostly thingamajigs. So I'm still waiting for that to come back, and I want to give you a complete story on that next week. And your research is being done. They have got an email, seeing as they got nothing else to do, they'll have that next week.
Excellent.
So I would like to ask Joanna, and are you going to join us next week? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Oh, yes, I've impressed her. I know I've impressed Ellie. See, Ellie put her thumb up without me even saying anything. Rosamond, you know what? You know that night you were meant to go on that night with us, weren't you?
Yes.
Why didn't you go?
Well, there was the one in December, wasn't there? Which the weather was really bad, as I recall. And then, I don't know, I didn't get the right feeling about it. And I've had the same sort of, looking at the pictures tonight, there's a sort of eerie feel about the place. I can't quite put my finger on.
Yeah.
Darkness. And I can sort of relate to what happened to you. Getting lost in the mists of time.
But the weird thing was, Rosamond, was that I didn't feel any negativity until it all started to hit me. I was in a major panic.
No.
I just
why you tread carefully.
Yeah. So
yes.
you know, I hear about time travel a lot. I didn't expect to experience it.
Can I say something about that gatehouse?
There might be something about that gatehouse simply because it's when you go in there, right, upstairs, right, they've got an upstairs and it's got a floor in it, it's got a roof in it, right, there's a glass window, right, it's not used and the door's always left open. It's a very strange building indeed. And do you know what? Like many things in history and archaeology, like we're going to be looking at the castles of the Welsh native build castles, we're going to be doing that on Wednesday. Lots of them, we look at views and places that people don't, you know, ever see. And that gatehouse, the weird one that I had experience at, you don't ever get to see that. You don't ever get to see the other side.
Mm-mm.
In fact, I don't have an image of the other side of it. Maybe Rosamond, your Archaeology Cymru iVis on, that's worth a photograph. And if you ever get caught, I'm going to deny I ever gave it to you.
It was when he was time traveling.
Exactly. Those that get the newsletter, you'll be having another newsletter soon. Those that are members, those that are registered with me will be having a phone call off me on Monday. Obviously, we've got this next week. Other than Ellie and Joanna, because it would be overkill, is everyone else joining us next week? Thumbs up.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I know Goff has got to join us because his youngsters are there. Let's have one more question before we go from Karen.
Okay, when was the priory actually built? Do we know that?
1129, 1130.
Can I ask another question, Carl?
Go for it.
You mentioned your children in a sort of rather random way, and I sort of imagined about 12 of them. Do you have 12?
Far wrong.
I have got Bethan, Owen, Emily, Kerry Ann, Ruben and Amaya, and maybe another one. I met this one woman once for a very short time, and then she abandoned her house and moved up to Birmingham without a buy nor leave. And strangely enough, she left a message for me on Facebook one day, something to do with having a child or an abortion. And I couldn't understand what she meant. And I gave the wrong reply and she never spoke to me again.
Oh.
So I feel something may be amiss there. Mind you, Goff's got 20 children, so don't just have a go at me. So on that note, have you all enjoyed it tonight?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good fun.
Good.
Yeah.
Anyone who wants to chat with me at the end in the lounge may do so about anything to do with a book or registration thing or anything to do with Wednesday's class or next week can do so. Those that are leaving us now, I'm going to say good night. Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Night night. Del, Sue, Karen, Ellie, Joanna, Rosamond, John, Goff, Amy, and Pam. Thank you very much.
Good night. Good night,
Thank
folks.
you very much.
Night, everybody.
Sleep well, everyone.
Good night, Pam. Good night.
They seem to leave.
If you leave me now, you take away the greatest part of me. Hey, they've all gone.
Oh, they went.
Weirdly enough, there was a lot to say on that one tonight, but I actually ran out of steam.
Really?
Yes.
Was it thinking about their experience draining you?
To be honest with you, I really don't feel well.
Oh no. Maybe it's just the thought of the priory. I never feel well when we go there.
It might be. I absolutely don't feel well. So, but that's life. So, not a problem. Back as normal next week. It's a shame. It's a shame Sophie didn't join us.
Yeah, I messaged her, but she didn't get back to me. So she's been busy. She's been busy gaming and everything. Well, no, she didn't get back to me. She still hasn't. So
tonight there was me, there was you, there was Goff, there was John.
Yep.
There was Ellie, there was Joanna, there was Del, there was Barbara, Sue, Pam, Rosamond. Is that it?
I think so.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's correct.
Yeah. Good. Sorry, my connection cut off. It's like it knows. As soon as I'm going to speak, it just goes. And it's like that's the only time it does it.
Yeah, I can understand that.
So it's like, I think the spirits don't like being on my side with these.
This is good, isn't it?
Oh, look at that. You're gone. And you're back. You're gone. And you're back.
So that's good. So, okay, then what I'm going to do, I will, apparently I can green screen as well.
Oh.
So that's going to be useful. I'm going to give it a go next week. So okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go now. So we'll see you soon.
Yeah, see you soon. Have a good week.
Night, night, Amy.
Good night.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Let's
Bye bye.
leave.
Let's
If I can
leave.
find
If
the
you
leave.
leave me now. Okay, I've got to stop the recording. So I'll see you soon. Bye. Bye bye.
Where's my